Hi guys, welcome back to the Writing Craft Podcast. I'm your host, Jenna.
And I am your host, Holly.
And today we're talking about burnout, specifically for writers, and how detrimental it can be to the creative writing process. So we're going to jump straight into kind of our experiences with it.
Yes, which, as we have discussed before, we're both workaholics, so I think we both have extensive experience with it in a variety of different ways. For me, I'm one of the people who, I don't know if there's a term for this, but I never really know when I'm heading for it because being productive, putting stuff out into the world, it's my safe space. So it's kind of scary when your safe space turns around and bites you in the ass. So I'm one of those people who will be like going, Energizer Bunny, and then something happens and like physically, and then my brain will catch up a little while later. So I don't know if that's how it has hit you before, Jenna, or if you're similar in that way.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I'm about 50-50. So 50% of the time, I'm exactly like that. I'll go, wouldn't even realize that, specifically if I'm doing like housework or if I'm reorganizing something, I'll like hurt myself, get a scratch, a bump, a bruise, like really mess myself up, and I won't even realize it until way later. And then I'll be like dead on my feet, just passing out kind of energy because I'm so out of it. And then even on like the slower side of that, I'll be writing, working, editing videos, and won't realize it until it's like 2 a.m. And then I'm like, oh shit, I have to work in like 4 hours? That's not good. And you don't even realize what time it is. You just get into like a hyper-focused state, and then you realize afterwards, like, oh crap, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I burnt myself out, I've been doing too much for too long. And then the other 50% of the time, it's kind of like, I'm burnt out, but I have no choice but to carry on. And that makes the burnout worse, while simultaneously making every single thing I'm doing just feel like a drag. And it's like, what do you even do in that situation?
Yeah, it's funny because just recently I've been dealing with like a huge work overload because I took on probably the most that I've ever taken on. And on one hand, it's great and it feels energizing and it's all stuff I want to be doing. But the problem is I'm having trouble saying no. And I was actually explaining to a friend, we were talking about this, and they were just saying, well, you have to take a break. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I literally can't. And they're like, well, things will wait. You can put this off. I'm like, no, I have deadlines. Like I don't. And they're like, well, if you really wanted to, you would take a break. You would make it work if you really wanted to. I'm like, you don't understand. And it made it so much worse because I'm like, I do want to. It doesn't matter how much I want to. I have deadlines and I need to get this stuff done. So that is kind of like the worst state for me when I do know that I'm hitting that wall, but I've put myself in a place where I cannot get out of it. And then when you have other people who don't get it saying to you like, oh, come on, just do it. It's like, how do I explain this?
Yeah, I mean, it's between deadlines, the fear and the wanting to not say no, and so you say yes to too many things. And then on top of that, it's also like it might be a self-imposed deadline or it might be like an actual hard deadline. But if it's a hard deadline where you literally cannot make it, like you can't push it off, you have no choice, like it has to get done by this day, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You just have to push through it, which will make the burnout worse, unfortunately. But in a creative space, like, unfortunately, we have deadlines, and there's really no other thing you can do. And then with self-imposed deadlines, it's also like, well, I could say no because it's my own self-imposed deadline. It's what I'm doing to myself. But at the same time, when you have anxiety about the project you're working on, it's like, well, I feel better if I treat myself with some care and know that I'm burnt out and stop? Or will I only just get anxiety and sad about putting off my project? And that'll make me feel worse. So it's like, there's no winning in that situation. You just have to every situation is different. You have to decide which is better for you in that exact moment. But it's never going to be a win-win. It's not.
Yeah, that is exactly it. What I had recently, where it's like, well, okay, sure, if I changed all these things around and I really was like, I absolutely need to take a break, and I said, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to change this deadline, I'm going to switch this around, let's put this off. In the end, I'm not actually going to be able to relax because the stuff isn't done and I know that it's still waiting there. So sometimes you have to finish those things if you're going to actually relax, because for me anyway, if I still have that to-do list and like, oh, I put it off and now it's going to happen next week, like there's no relaxing. I'm just going to be sitting there like, oh, it's still coming and I haven't dealt with this yet. It's so much better when I, wrap it all up with a neat bow and then I can go take a breather for a bit.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, because like one of the things that I realized right off the bat when I re-entered school and when I went back to college was if I waited for like Fridays to do my homework or like the weekend, I absolutely hated my weekends, and they were my 1 days off because I work Monday through Friday. So I'm like, okay, I need to get my homework done as soon as it's available on like Monday, Tuesdays, because if I put it off all week, especially to the weekend, I'm not going to enjoy my entire week, because I know I have things waiting for me that I can't put off, that I have to complete on a deadline. And sure, it can be due Sunday night, but then I know from Monday to the following Sunday that I have something I need to do on a deadline that is difficult, and I'm not going to enjoy anything else I'm doing, like playing video games, resting, writing, because I know I have that hanging over my head.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that when I'm in that, the only thing that helps me, and I will get into this more, but just as we babble a bit about our personal stuff, the only thing that I can do that will center me for a bit is like I'll get up in the morning and I'll make myself do yoga, which makes me turn off my brain. And even if it's just 10 minutes and it's barely doing anything, it's just doing a bit of a like sun salute or whatever, to make myself turn my brain off for like 15 to 30 minutes if I can, then that's the only thing that's going to help. That's a type of break that I can take. And it's just that little thing. It's like, okay, I can do this, but there's no way I'm going to, have a whole evening off or a whole weekend or a week or something like that when I'm in the middle of a big project or a time crunch.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been doing that more recently with working out, especially because it's like if you're lifting a weight, which is what I've been really enjoying doing, you really have to think about the fact that you have a heavy object in your hand, and if you aren't paying attention, you're going to hurt yourself. And so my brain has to like shut off all the other stupid stuff going around cycling in my brain, and has to focus on just lifting the weight, just doing the thing that I'm currently doing. And that's about the only time my brain isn't on a constant cycle of what do I have to do next? What do I have to do next? Oh, this is on the to-do list. Oh, look at my Kanban board. Oh, look at my journal full of things I haven't done yet.
Exactly. Oh, it's so good for that. Just doing something where your brain has to go into the physical, and like I'm not someone who likes working out. I hate it. But if you find that right thing where you can hit that switch where your brain goes off a little bit, it's like, okay, at least I have this. I'm shutting my brain off from the to-do list for like a little bit of time, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think anything physical, like I'm not really like a gym girly, but I am like I want to have the back muscles of Korra from Legend of Korra.
Understandable. Yeah.
So like I found that I enjoy like lifting weights and things like that, but I like not a fan of cardio really. I'm not a fan of doing like the sit-up, push-up things, even though like I know it's good for you or whatever. But like just finding the physical thing that helps you turn off your brain for a second, even if it's just for a couple minutes, is going to be super duper useful for like slowing down the rampant train of thoughts that is full of anxiety and is full of the burnout and is full of all the this thing and this thing and this thing you have to do. And then it'll help, and it could be like swimming, it could be jogging, it could be weightlifting, it could be walking your dog, and you have to of course always think about what your physical limitations are, because obviously people who aren't completely able-bodied are going to struggle with things more than others, but just anything physical or outside or anything that shuts off your brain is going to be so useful, because the alternative is just the train of thoughts keeps on going, and then it'll burn you out more even when you're not doing anything. You could be doing nothing and your thoughts will still burn you out.
Yeah, and I find if it is a break like gaming or watching a movie or something, it is harder to get that total turn off that you get when you're focused on something physical. And like for me, I can't meditate, but it's like a meditative state because it does that sort of level of turn off. But when I'm, if I watch a TV show or I hop on like Dragon Age or something, even if I'm brought into that story, there are always going to be parts of my brain that are like, sliding away and going like, oh yeah, this thing, and remember this, and if you just like tabbed out of this window for a second, you could get this little thing done. So I'm still doing it when it's something like that. For some reason, the physical thing just does the trick to actually turn my brain off for a minute.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think part of that too comes with like guilt, because you're like, oh, I don't want to do something like that I feel like is a reward, because like playing video games or reading a book, because it's like I know I still have a to-do list after this. So it doesn't feel like an actual reward, because you still feel like, oh, there's things that are uncompleted, things that I still have to do. And then it's kind of like that, you know, guilty pleasure feeling of, oh, I'm playing Dragon Age. Oh, I'm rereading my favorite book I've read 1,000,000 times. I'm watching my favorite movie. And it doesn't hit the same, because you're like, oh, like I love this, but now I feel guilty about enjoying this thing. And like no one wants to feel that way about something that's supposed to bring them comfort. But you do when you're a workaholic.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, because if you're not someone who's super into working out, that can feel a bit like work too, but a type of work that's a bit better when you're in the midst of your big to-do list. Because yeah, like doing yoga doesn't feel like a reward to me. It feels like I'm still doing something constructive in a way. So I think that's the difference between that and playing a video game, and another reason why my brain doesn't, you know, it switches to the right place rather than the guilt place.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because it's like, oh, this is something good for my health. This is something good for my body, so I'm taking care of myself. Ooh, look, I'm not a workaholic. I'm doing something healthy. Workaholics aren't healthy. Look at me, you know? So you don't feel as guilty because you know it's something you should be doing, and it's because it's difficult, and sometimes it feels like a punishment even. So like a lot of people get into a negative cycle where they're like, oh, I wasn't as productive. Let me go clear my head by punishing myself with a workout. That is not the attitude you want to take at all, because it's not going to make you feel good. Versus like, oh, I get to take care of my body by doing this active thing, and it helps me shut off my brain so I can come back to my projects with a better mental state. Like, it's a much better mindset to have versus, I suck, everything sucks, I'm going to go lift a weight and hurt my back.
You're describing my partner right now. Yeah. Oh man, it's so funny because there is a lot of like masochism, unintentional masochism in being, you know, being overly productive, I think. And it's just like you try to cover it up and put band-aids on it. It's like, yeah, but there's still a degree of that in there. I'm doing that to myself all the time.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think it, you know, goes back to like the starving artist kind of cliche, especially with writers, because it's like, you know, we'll hear about singers and we'll be like, oh yeah, they're like pop stars on a stage. They're not sad, even if they have like the saddest lyrics. But with writers specifically, like writers and poets, we're like, oh my god, they're starving. They're not paid well. They're having a horrible life. Like, look at the Charles Bukowskis of the world. They just have like the most depressing lives ever. And so they, in a way, they become sort of iconic, and we, you know, associate those two things together. So we figure, oh, if I'm being a creative writer, I should be a starving artist. That the two go hand in hand. And I don't think we consciously are aware of this, but subconsciously we're like, oh, to write good art, it comes from suffering. So if I'm not suffering, I need to make myself suffer to make good art. And all that is just a vicious cycle of you repeating bad behavior to make yourself have more depth, quote unquote. And all it does is literally hurt your productivity, hurt your creativity, hurt yourself, and then it just makes you mentally ill. And yeah, sure, beautiful art has been made by mentally ill people for, you know, the longest time, but so has art been made by people who have healed and have taken care of themselves. And like, you know, I feel like too, we read and we appreciate literature that is in tune with us currently. So like, if everything you're reading is sad and depressing and you feel good about it because you feel like it resonates with you, then of course you're going to think like, oh, this is the most masterful thing in the world. I need to be like this too, so I'm going to be sad. Versus if you're happy and healing and healthy, you're like, oh, I love reading this happy, you know, bullshit that I'm reading because it's resonating with me and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever read. And so you want to stay happy. But then if you read the sad thing, you're like, oh no, now I'm depressed and sad. But if you're cynical and sad and you read the happy thing, you're like, oh, fuck that guy, he doesn't know what it's like. And so you always find what you need in that moment to feel like you're being like relating with somebody. But if you stay in that negative side the whole time, like, there's no helping you at that rate. Like, you want to stay there, you want to stay in that space, and, like, you can only go so far in that space.
That's a really good point because there is heavy romanticism of suffering and darkness in literature and other creative fields. And I know that for me personally, I know I present very dark, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're sad, you're goth." It's like, well, goths are actually pretty happy and positive. We just, we look at death and stuff, and we just face it, and we're good with it, and that's the thing. We'll have skulls around us, and we'll go through graveyards, but really, we just want to. What I always say is, we just want to lie around in the grass and listen to The Cure. But when when I was younger and going through the teenage angst, I created quite a bit of really good art and poetry and stuff. I mean, to the point where I'm 34 now, and in the Stygian collection, the book that we just put out, one of my 2 poems in there I wrote when I think I was like 19. So I still thought it was really, worth publishing so much longer, later. And I absolutely went through a period of time where I thought if I sort of lost that angsty emotional darkness that I felt heavily during periods when I was younger, like I probably up till I don't know, like my mid-20s, honestly. Like the 20s were kind of messy. I love my 30s, but 20s were a bit messy. And I thought if I lost that, I would lose something in my artistry. And instead, I decided, well, I'd kind of like to be happy. I kind of like to enjoy my life and, make the most out of it. And I have to drop that a little bit so that I'm just not being weighed down all the time. And the cool thing is when you drop that, you find other sources of inspiration, and they're better. And I know we're in a tangent off of our original topic, but I think it does all apply, like to do with your mindset and stuff like that, because the more you are in a better headspace, the easier it's going to be to conquer something like burnout, to take the right steps for self-care, and to value yourself and respect yourself so that you don't hurt yourself. And yeah, for me, I realized I get inspired by locations and new things and going out into the world. And as much as I love being at home, I'm very introverted. I love my little cave. I'm like, well, I'm going to go out into the world, and that's going to inspire me. I don't need to be lying on my bed sobbing for my poetry to be good.
Yeah, and I think, too, like, being willing to go out of your comfort zone to experience new things, it makes your art 100% better in all ways, because you're, like, not just stuck in your small view of the world. You have definitely a bigger worldview of how things can be different. And I think that's one of the ways that writers get so stuck, is because they're like, oh, I'm writing, I'm at home, I'm only in my own real world, in my house, and then also in the world that I'm writing, which is influenced by my trauma, my upbringing, my things I enjoy, things that I hate. It's influenced very much by my biases, by my beliefs. And so you just basically take your mental state, put it on the page, and then you stay in it for so long, because it takes so long to write a book and to edit it and to get it out there for people to read. And so I feel like one of the things that kept me going back to my last novel, Spaceborne, was the fact that I wasn't ready to leave the mental space that I was in when I wrote it. And because of where I was living at the time, I kept being re-traumatized by the same things that inspired the book in the first place. And so even when I had moved away from that situation, I still was healing from it, and I wasn't ready to heal and finish moving on from it. Like, mentally, yes, I was, but emotionally, I was still, like, in sort of my victim phase of, like, oh, woe is me, like, I've dealt with this thing, and I'm still going through it. Even if I'm not physically going through it, my mental state is still going through what I went through. And this book was my comfort zone and my escape while I was in that, period of my life. And while I was ready to heal, I healed by editing the book again and again and changing the character so she was a little bit more healed from what she went through every single time. And by the time I finished, my last draft of the book, she was a more healed version of herself than she was in the first version by a long shot. And so I allowed myself to develop and heal through that book, and that's why I latched onto it for so long, I feel like, on top of just like loving the world and wanting to see it out there one day. It was also this very like emotional, personal thing. But I feel like that same thing can happen in a negative way for people who get stuck in this depressive spiral of burnout, get well enough to go back to doing the thing that burned us out in the first place, never deal with the thing that's actually burning us out, and then just repeating the cycle over and over again.
Because yeah, I think it can be easy to we talk about like the positive sides of productivity and it being sort of a help and a good thing in some ways, but if you are using that, using your, you know, your writing and your productivity, your projects to mask something underlying that you need to be dealing with, then you're going to get hit harder when things do go wrong. So like I find there are a lot of like I've known people who put a lot of effort into sort of building their facade so that things feel like all right and they're working and like okay, well I'm doing this stuff so obviously I'm good, but they don't have the foundation to continue with the house metaphor. You know, you've got the beautiful sort of frontage, the facade, but you have no foundation. So like if someone, you know, comes along and takes a hammer to it or just, you know, does something, you're gonna crumble pretty easily. So but yeah, a really important thing I think when dealing with creativity and productivity and pushing yourself, you want to know that you're good. You're good to do it. And, and even like no matter how good you are, it's gonna affect you. That's another thing. Like I know for me, I've thought before like, well, I can keep doing this. I can do this. I can do anything. I can, you know, I've scheduled everything. So why would I burn out? And then like that'll get you. You gotta be self-aware when you're pushing yourself this way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where there's definitely convergence between the hustle culture, toxic productivity, and then toxic positivity is where, oh, I can do anything I set my mind to. I'm going to hustle, 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 grind, and then I'm going to do all of the things that I want to do because I'm so positive and everything works out for me. Listen to my affirmations, they totally work. And yeah, that's all great, good, dandy. But if you keep telling yourself that, oh, I can do anything, that slowly ends up becoming, I can do everything. And there's only so many hours in the day. And unless you can outsource a lot of your workload to other people, which is what the majority of celebrities do, like people always say like, oh, you have the same hours in the day as Beyonce. Listen, Beyonce has a whole team and a lot of money. She can kind of just pay people to do whatever she needs to get done. She's not over here having to do the dishes, cook dinner, drive and sit in traffic. She's got a private jet. Why would she need to? Like, you know, you don't really have the same amount of hours in the day as Beyonce. And it's great to motivate yourself. But if you're motivating yourself to just continue hurting yourself by burning yourself out, it's literally only going to hurt you in the long run because you're continuing this cycle of, oh, mentally I'm totally okay, nothing else is wrong in my life because look at how productive I am. Meanwhile, you have something seriously wrong going on internally, externally. You know, like one of the big things that I always say when it comes to burnout is you have to figure out, why are you burnt out in the first place? Like, what is going on that caused the burnout?
Hmm. And that can be hard to determine, honestly. Like I've had a recent experience with it, and another interesting point. Some people will talk about the different degrees of burnout, and I've heard some people say like, "Oh, well, that's not real burnout. When burnout really happens to you, like you'll know." And that's also a really toxic thing to say to people because it's different for everyone, and there are different degrees for it, but they are all equally valid. So, like if you look up some, you know, some people talk about burnout, it can be really extreme, right? Like you've been working yourself, you know, let's just say you're working yourself to the limit for like an entire year. You're not taking weekends, you're not getting anything, and you wind up like having like heart palpitations and you land yourself in the hospital, that sort of thing, you know, that really intense of like, I can't talk to friends, I can't talk to family, I'm just like done, I can't function as a human being. And that's you know, that's the sort of the worst that it can be, right? But just because that's not happening to you doesn't mean you're not experiencing burnout. And for me, just to share, you know, without all the details, but I, you know, a bit of a recent story. You know, I have my YouTube channel. I have a full-time job at the same time. So there's my channel, there's the full-time job. I do social media for a local company. I do a channel for them as well. So I have two channels. And then we launched a small publishing press. So there's been all of that work, the emails, recruiting people, and we put out an anthology as our very first project, which is like, dealing with 20 plus authors and trying to give them the best possible experience. Like amidst all of this, launched a channel for that. It goes on, not even including, keeping up a household, helping friends and family, trying to find some time for social elements. And so when like a couple weeks ago, there was a personal thing and it just, it shut me down. I had a whole week that was just dead because this personal emotional thing came up, and it was all I could deal with because I had, narrowed my scope so far that once that came up, it was kind of the final straw, right? Like it was so tenuous where I was. And when that one thing came up, I was like, oh, that's it. And I could not do anything. It was the first time in years, I think, where I actually, missed things that I had scheduled. And like I was thinking to myself, oh, I should be putting out these social posts, but I was just not capable. And all I could do, I was staying with a friend, and I was just like, she and I were up till 5 a.m. every day, just talking. I think we'd wake up with, our throats sore because we had talked so much, and it just turned into basically a week of, therapy between myself and my friend, because it is all that we could deal with. So all that to say, you never know how it's going to hit you, and it's always going to be kind of shocking, and it doesn't have to, land you in the hospital or make you physically ill or something like that. Sometimes that one little thing will come up and just push you over to the edge, and you're like, oh, it's not even this thing that's the problem. This is a problem, but there are so many other things that are a problem, because I would have been able to deal with this in a totally different way otherwise. Like, I am burnt out. I am done. My brain is fried.
A lot of people don't even realize they're burnt out until the moment that there's like the straw that broke the camel's back. There's that singular, personal or professional or whatever it is thing that comes up, and then everything else falls apart. And this has been like literally a cycle with me with my YouTube channel for years now, because if you look online, it says my channel was like it was made in 2013 but not active until like 2015. That's bullshit. I've been on YouTube making YouTube videos since like 2012, 2013. And so I've always done a thing where I've made a bunch of videos and then I go on a hiatus, and then a bunch of videos come out and then I go on a hiatus. And it's because my life was literally at that time like a roller coaster of just constant burnout, and then, healing myself, and then one tiny thing would happen in the middle of my productivity that would send me down the path of not being able to do basically anything again, and I'd climb myself out of there, be productive, feeling pretty good, and then I'd go too hard at it, and I'd be at the precipice of burnout, and then I'd be like, no, I'm fine, and then one tiny thing would happen, and everything else would fall apart. And that's been basically my whole life story with, YouTube and a bunch of other things in my life, because there's never, up until recently, in the last like maybe 2-3 years, there's never been a point in my life where I've had an extended window of time where I haven't been burnt out, where I've been able to be productive at a normal level and just consistently set my future self up for success. So it's like, I'll mass film videos, and then something 2 months from now will ruin my whole time. And even if I have videos filmed, all of a sudden I don't have any energy left to edit them. Or, something technology happened and now they're gone. Or, I did edit them and now I don't like them. So there's a million other, reasons for that. And there's, going on and off of projects, not being able to stick with one, not finishing any projects that you're writing. When it comes to YouTube, taking long hiatuses like that. Like, there's so many different ways that burnout can manifest. And then you don't even realize that it's hit you until just one tiny thing ruins every bit of, motivation, inspiration, the flow that you had going in your productivity. And for people who I notice are more like fully adjusted people, who aren't burnout, they have something happen and they'll take a moment and a beat to like process the thing, and then they'll go right back to the way they were before, just obviously still dealing emotionally with whatever happened. But when you're at burnout, it's like a full stop of everything for however long it needs to take. But I know there's the saying too, and the phrasing as well, that I learned recently, which is like your spoons. It's the number of spoons you have that are the energy you have, and people who are obviously not as able-bodied or neurodiverse and other things like this, they'll have less spoons than other people will have. And so you have to decide what your energy is going to be expended on today, as well as your time. And when you're in burnout, like, you have no spoons and you're still like trying to act like you do. And then the moment something happens, it's like someone just ripped away all your spoons and you're not getting it for weeks, months, years, whatever it may be. And you were saying like there's different degrees of burnout between like the really, really, bad, you hurt yourself, things like that, and then the more minor stuff. But really it's all the same thing, and it just is the degree in which it manifests. But it can manifest as, different things at different points of time. When I think about burnout, when I think about workaholics, I always think about my dad, and literally exactly what you described is that he basically worked himself to death, and he had a heart attack and he died. And he was the hardest working person I knew, which I always admired and I always tried to emulate. But now thinking back as, a more well-adjusted adult, at least I like to think so, I'm realizing he literally like worked himself to the bone for other people's approval, because he never felt like he was like loved because he was adopted. So he always had like abandonment issues and stuff. And so he did so much to try and be loved and approved by his family, his like chosen family. And it was never enough, not because it wasn't enough to other people, but it was never enough to him, because the person he really wanted was the love of his mother who abandoned him. And so that's kind of like his origin story of his burnout, which was for his entire life, and it got to the point where it literally made him sick and he passed. And so it started off small. It started off with just this one small moment of not feeling truly loved as a child, not feeling wanted as a child, simply because of someone else's decision to give him up, and then grew because he never got something important, which is therapy, and then ended up manifesting it later on in an early death. And so right now it might be like, oh, my burnout's like small, it's manageable, whatever, but if you keep allowing yourself to burn out, like, you literally are shortening your lifespan. And it's something that I didn't realize, that like, oh, I was trying to emulate my dad, and my dad was not a healthy person. Like, my dad was not someone I should necessarily emulate in that way. And he was a great guy, but like, he did do that to himself and ended up hurting everyone around him. So we have to think about how is, burnout affecting us, not just in the short term and with our projects, but also with our health in the long term. Like, it can definitely manifest later on in life as something very serious, and you won't realize it until it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so sorry to hear about that, just because it's, especially someone who's driven, you hear that sort of thing and you're like, yeah. I mean, when you mentioned hustle culture earlier, there's so much push, and if you're already sort of bent towards that, you're gonna latch on. But stress is real. Like, stress ages you. Stress affects you more than, like, it may feel just like sort of a mental thing that you should overcome and you should be able to do whatever you intend to do, but it is affecting you like on a much deeper level than you probably think. And I mean, I've gotten physically ill and realized I was stressed after the fact. So I mean, as people who are interested in the occult, in nature, in magic, like, we have to understand that everything's connected. In our, in our body, our mind, our physical self, these things are all connected, and self-care has to apply to your, your physical self, your mental self, I mean, right down to like your digestive system, like, everything is connected, and everything is affecting you. And going too hard can absolutely like push you to an unhealthy point. And I think that phase works smarter, not harder. You hear that all the time, but it is very true. And that's something I'm trying to figure out right now, especially in the shadow of my burnout, which I realize I'm still sort of in to a certain degree, because I had to jump into a lot of things for, like we said before, when you have deadlines, you kind of have to get back into it. But the other day, we had a bunch of trees torn down outside of our building, and I was like making an Instagram video about it and crying. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm still pretty emotional right now. So, yeah, you gotta care for yourself.
One of the ways I care for myself, if you're watching on the video, is my emotional support dog who heard me talking about my dad and came over and decided to be in my face. So if you're watching on the video, you got a little bit of Katara. Please enjoy her while she's here.
So cute.
Yeah, she's cute and she knows it. That's a problem. But I think, too, a lot of times people don't talk about that emotional side of things. And, we hear a lot about self-care, which rightfully I think we should. But at the same time, it's kind of been made into this, like, trendy, cute thing when I don't think people want to deal with the fact and talk about the fact that self-care can be, like, kind of scary. I don't know if you've seen those, like, emotional release sessions that people have shown where, like, they just end up, like, doing a certain body move or, like, they have presses on their body in a certain way, but they're, like, called, like, traumatic releases or something like that.
With chakras,
yeah, I think
right?
so. And they end up, like, screaming and crying. And, like, that's a form of self-care, too. Like, if you need to just go into the middle of the woods and scream like a banshee, if you need to, like, cry for the night and just build a pillow for it, or, like, if you need to go and return to, like, healing your inner child and do things that your inner child, as silly as it might seem as an adult, needs to go and do, then, like, you have to do the thing. It might seem silly, it might seem scary, it might, deal with things that you don't want to deal with, but part of, I think, the magic in it that's naturally ingrained in it, and if you don't believe in magic, then sure, take it with a grain of salt. But if you do believe in magic, there's a certain magic in accepting that you are this way because of things you've gone through, things that you're continuing to experience. And the reality is that you can bend that reality to your own shape and your own will, and you can manifest new outcomes for yourself. You can work towards, new outcomes for yourself. But you shouldn't only be working on new outcomes for yourself for your goals and your productivity. You should be looking at new outcomes for yourself, for your mental health and well-being, for your, physical health and well-being as well. And you get to transform yourself into whoever you want to be. You think earlier, you talked about how, like, oh, I'm kind of goth, so people think I'm sad and, creepy, like, whatever. And so people are like, oh, no, you must be sad and depressed because you deal with, dead skeletons, like, cemetery, scary. But in reality, it's like you're living your truth in what makes you most comfortable. You're living in a way that fully aligns with what's in your heart and your soul. You're dressing the way that you want to dress and showing up in the world the way you want to show up in the world. And there's something so powerful in that. And a lot of people and a lot of artists, they're trying to force themselves into this starving artist or there was the girl boss era for a while. So they're trying to put on this persona. And even now I see people doing this with, like, witchcraft and stuff, which not here to gatekeep them because I think, the craft is welcome to all, but there are certain people who are only doing it because it's trendy. And it's like, is it what you actually want to do, though? Like, do what you actually want to do. Show up as the artist you actually want to be. Like, there's so many people who are wanting to become writers because they want to go and have a movie made. Do you actually want to be a writer then, or do you want to actually be a script writer? Like, do you want to be a book author, or do you think that that's just a pathway into becoming, like, someone in the movies and you think a writer's more realistic? Do you actually want to be making, like, films? Do you want to be making a different kind of novel than what you currently are? Are you wanting to write a memoir and not a fiction novel, a historical, not a fantasy? And I think this falls into a lot of writers get burnt out as well when they're trying to write a story for the market versus writing a story that comes from their heart. And that will cause burnout too, because you have to write what's coming from in here, not from what's coming in your brain. Like, you have to go from your heart, not your head. And so many people are just denying that part of themselves to try and make more money, to fit into a market, to fit into what agents want. And it's like, that can work for a time, but then guess what happens is the burnout will hit hard. We see tons of times people who have the one-hit wonder books or songs, they come out with something that's super catchy, super lovable, everybody likes it, and then they're gone because they know they can't upkeep on something that's not authentic.
Yeah, and I mean the internet has a huge role in burnout because it's harder than ever to really find your voice, right? And I've talked a lot about maybe not as much here, but I've been doing these interviews on the Stygian Society YouTube channel where I talk to all the authors who are involved in the anthology. And we usually touch on like how YouTube has been a positive thing for us. And I will always say it's been incredibly positive. I mean, it brought me into the writing world in a way that I don't know if I would have gotten into it otherwise. It's made me learn more. It's opened me up to a lot of new topics, a lot of new inspiration. I met my partner there. Like it's been very, very good for me. But at the same time, a lot of the time, you know, when you talk about having cycles on your channel, when I pull back from my channel a few times, it's been because I get into doing something that doesn't align with me, because I start sort of like when I first did it, if anyone looks at my first video, it's very terrible. I'm just sitting on my bed being awkward, but you know, it's genuine, right? And I started it just being like very uncertain, saying, well, I'm going to try to get into this NaNoWriMo thing. I don't know what I'm doing like awkward finger guns and stuff. And it's terrible, but it's, it's real. And as I got into it, and when you do content in NaNoWriMo, I mean, that's a period you always have to watch out for burnout in. So right now I'm mentally preparing myself for that, especially as a municipal liaison. It's like next level. But I brought in a good group of people through doing that because it's a, you know, popular community effort. But from there, I just launched into, okay, what are other people doing on AuthorTube? What sort of education should we do? What direction should my channel go in? What's the algorithm? And you get wrapped into this whole thing of like, okay, well, I just got a bunch of followers. I want to keep this moving. I want this to be something. And then you realize very quickly, okay, well, this doesn't actually resonate with me that much. I don't like what I'm doing. Sure, I'm pumping it out and it's not that hard. I can write these scripts, I can educate people and give people tips, but do I really like what I'm doing? And then I have to just, you know, shut YouTube off because I'm like, I'm in this state where I don't like what I'm doing. I don't feel genuine, and it's just, you know, draining my energy. It's like I'm, you know, an energy vampire on myself. So finding that place of authenticity is also something that you really have to do to feel good about what you're doing. And that is really hard in the internet when you're being bombarded all the time with you know, other people's channels, other people's social media accounts, you know, social media where people have fake lives. Some, like you said, you know, someone going out and being like, ooh, I'm into, you know, paganism and witchcraft, but it's just an image and it's not something they really subscribe to in a legitimate way. And there are just so many I don't know, catfishes, fake things out there that you have to battle and that are constantly assaulting your brain. It's tough to be creative on the internet.
Yeah, I definitely think so as well. And both of us work in marketing too, so it's kind of like our logical brain wants to go, oh, let's go figure out what works to get the numbers up. But then at the same time, if what gets the numbers up isn't aligning, you're kind of like, shit, what do I do now? And I think that's currently kind of honestly where I am sitting with my channel, because I've been making vlogs and they've been fun, and they get more views than my usual like tip videos do. And while they are fun and I enjoy it, I'm like, do I want to be known as like an AuthorTube vlogger? Like, is this all I want my content to be? But I'm pouring all this effort into like advice videos, and not that many people are watching them. But I'm not even giving advice on things that I feel that passionate about. What do I actually want to talk about in these videos related to writing? And I think I'm falling into this cycle of knowing that there's got to be, you know, we could do a whole talk on AuthorTube in a podcast.
Oh yeah.
So I'll save a lot of that for there. But I think there's got to be a third option of something else between tips and vlogs, and then like Kate Kavanaugh's experiments that she's done that more people have picked up. There's got to be another option for content out there for writers, because we're so creative. Why in the world can't we think of another idea? It's specifically me. I'm like, there's got to be something else I can do and make that I'm more passionate about. And I'm thinking about TikTok too, where I'm like, I'm only using sounds other people have made, but like I know language so well because I write. Why can't I just make them, like, the good language come out of my mouth to make into content, you know? So yeah, that's mentally where I think I'm at. And it's, you know, I feel like I took another mini hiatus from regular posting videos and just did vlogs since I moved, just trying to figure out my video space and everything, and I kind of used it as an excuse not to make content because I was still organizing things in here. But now that I'm making videos again, I'm like, I don't want to get burnt out on this, so I need to talk more from the heart, but I need to figure out what my heart is even saying in the first place. And I think that that's a great way to get out of burnout in the first place, is figuring out, what do you actually want to be doing? Do you actually want to do the thing that's burning you out?
I think I don't know if it's the same for you. I'm guessing it is, but I think that when you're a creative driven person, you start off when you're a kid, like, you know what you want, like you have these aspirations and goals, and even if they're not as plotted out as they might be, in adult form, you kind of always, you feel like you know who you are and what you want. And so that's how it was for me. Like, I always knew that. Like, I was always the person who was like, my parents are artists, I'm an artist, I write, I create things, like, that's it. I want to do that professionally. And there was a certain point that I hit where I'm like, oh, okay, but how? What do I actually want? And then things just started appearing where I didn't really know, and I didn't really know what direction I was going in. And that was kind of terrifying because it was new. And so I think we're kind of at a similar point, like, at least in our channels, where I haven't posted in 3 months. Sorry. And I had this great series idea. So when you talk about like the things that we should be coming up with being more creative, the problem with that is when you do come up with one of those concepts, and I put out one of these, I've only done one, they become bigger projects that take more time, and they're not, algorithm friendly. And if you haven't already locked in like a large sort of fan base, you see larger YouTubers who they can pivot to a certain extent because people are watching, and it's like, okay, well, maybe it's new and it's uncertain, but you have that base there who's going to go with you, and at least, even if they don't like it, they're going to amplify it, so you bring in new people. But when you're already small, if you pivot, you might lose that little element that you have, and it may just completely obliterate your channel. So it's scarier. And so I want to do this whole journey of putting out my epic fantasy novel that I've been working on since I was like 13 years old, but it's a lot more work. So after I put that video out and realized, oh no, with everything else on my plate, how am I going to do another one of these? Like, this was such a big undertaking. I did, costume changes in different locations, and I had to plan it all out, and I don't even know exactly how I'm going to do the next part of it. And it takes long because I'm editing the novel. There's just so many moving parts. It's like, do I need to find something to do here that I can do in between this? And again, is that going to burn me out? So I'm just frozen.
No, I think that can be a problem too, because it's like, if you have a problem saying no, then you've committed yourself to too many things, and then you finally figure out what you actually want to do, and now you don't have time to do it.
Yeah, so you got to untangle. You got to untangle and extricate from everything else, and then it feels terrible if other people are relying on you. You're like, I can't do it anymore. Sorry.
Oh yeah, like I just hope people forget that I said I was going to do the thing, rather than telling them. And it's such a bad habit that I'm like, I hope they forget I exist. Do not perceive me. You can't see me at this point. Like, I didn't say it. I was like, I'll like girl boss gatekeep gaslight. I will be like, no, I never said I was going to do that. You're crazy. It's horrible. It's manipulative, but I get so uncomfortable when I'm like, I know I said I was going to do that, but no.
It's hard. Like, I hate that element of myself because I do have a lot of people pleaser in me. And which is just kind of funny because that's not my general vibe in a lot of ways. Like, I'm very like, oh, I'm going to do this and I want to do things my way. But then at the same time, it depends on the project, right? If someone comes along and they're like, here's this cool thing, I'll be like, yes, I'm doing it. If I like it, I'm going to do it. And that's the problem, because I don't want to turn down any opportunity. But then it's like, well, I'm doing too many things I like, and which ones are actually like serving me best?
Yeah. And that's how I got Holly on this podcast. Alrighty. Well, I think it's time to jump into sort of preventative measures from burnout, because we've talked about kind of, how to get over it, the pros and cons, I guess, which is mostly just cons. But we haven't talked about how to avoid it in the first place.
Yeah, because I think that's a really good thing to have in place. And it is kind of a cycle, right? So a bit of the recovery measures are going to be things that you can put in place so that it doesn't happen again. But especially if you're someone who doesn't realize right away that it is happening, like you can't put a stop to it, you can't take a break, you're going to want to lay that foundation again that is going to help you avoid it or at least get through it in a more healthy way. So, I mean, for me, what I'm doing right now is focusing on that work smarter, not harder. And I'm going to my obsessive note and schedule self, and I'm just laying out everything that I do, and I am mercilessly going through like, what do I need to drop? What can I drop? And doing that, then I am going into like, what can I delegate? What can I schedule? What can I just sort of put in place? Like, what kind of schedules can I put in place so that I am not scrambling at any point? Because the second you start scrambling, like there's going to be that period of time where you're like, oh, it's smooth and things are okay, but something will happen where, oh, I have to scramble. And you want your schedule to be really good. If you are planning to be doing a lot, make sure your schedule is good. Make sure you do things in advance. Make sure there isn't room for things to be last minute. Make sure that you know what you're going to do if something goes wrong. So have all of those things in place so that you don't have to reach that point in your mind where you're panicking. And like, I mean, panic is always going to happen to a certain extent, but like put as many measures in place as you can when you're in a good mental state to try and keep that going and mitigate it as much as possible. So that would be my first tip.
And I think you do that pretty well considering you schedule your things, pretty far into advance. So especially if you're going to get like, you work retail, so you're going to be really, really tired during the, Black Friday, Christmas time, making sure you have your posts scheduled if you're doing social media, write more in advance, maybe skip NaNoWriMo and do Camp Nano instead, whatever it is you need to do to be prepared for the times in your life that you're going to be busy. Or like for me, I am a Virgo, so I'm ruled by Mercury, and Mercury currently, when we're filming this, is in retrograde. And if I was smart, which apparently I'm not, because I'm do as I say, not as I do. But if I had been smart this time around, I would have planned accordingly to know that, hey, Mercury's in retrograde, I should plan things for that period in time, because I know things tend to go to shit whenever Mercury's in retrograde, especially now that it's Virgo season. My birthday's coming up, and also Mercury's in retrograde, so I would plan accordingly.
And I'm a Gemini, so we're both screwed.
We're in the trenches together.
Yes.
But so that'd be like number one thing that I do is plan in advance if you can. This is my favorite thing to do, and the thing that I do the least, which is ridiculous, but I'm always running out of time, so that's why. And then one thing I've been working on is communicating better to people in my life and telling them, for example, no, or can I get help? Oh my god. If you're a workaholic, if you burn yourself out all the time, you probably have a problem with saying no and asking for help.
Yep.
Yeah. We're all feeling it here. So being able to ask other people for help, like one thing I've been doing recently is I take my dog on like a sunset walk with me and my fiance, and she gets her little walk in, I get my steps in, like we go play with her and stuff. And while I'm doing that, I'm usually supposed to be cooking dinner, but what I try to do is I have like, something simmering, or I have something in the oven, and I'll just say, hey, to my sibling and be like, hey, can you take it out in like 10 minutes? Well, I'll be back when it's cooled off and I'll eat. And they'll be up there and they'll just do, something fun. They'll watch TV, whatever they're going to do, and they just have a timer going so that they can take something out of the oven, they can look for something, they can watch something being fried, whatever it is that we're cooking, and they, kind of help me to finish it off while we go and take the dog for a walk. And it's been so nice because I'm like, hey, they're helping me cook for once. They're helping at the end here. I'm getting to walk the dog. I'm getting some fresh air before, turning in for the night kind of thing. And it's only because I finally asked for help with something. And really the only person I used to ask for help at all was my fiance. And now I'm kind of like, no, I have other people I can rely on. I have other people I can communicate with. And you can never like over communicate something. Like tell people, your loved ones, your plans. If you're on deadline for something, like they might not fully understand, especially if it's a self-imposed deadline, or even if they just don't understand writing in general, what your deadline might mean, or the thing that you're doing that might be burning you out. They might not understand why it's burning you out. They might be like, I thought you enjoyed that. It's creative. Why would you be burnt out from it? But I think that becomes from them thinking, oh, it's something creative, so it's not like a real job. And, you know, the starving artist thing too is, oh, they don't get paid for it. It's not a real job. But if you want it to be your career, if you want it to end up being your livelihood, you have to treat it early like that's what it is. And I think having a communication with your loved ones in your life to give you some grace when it comes to certain aspects of, you know, your life, your planning, your future career, your writing, and communicating that with them early is really beneficial, because you can't just assume that they're going to know that it's stressful. You can't assume that they're going to magically know that every Friday at 4 p.m. you write your novel. They're not going to magically know that you have a deadline on this day if you don't tell them. So communication with anybody of, you know, key importance in your life in these areas who might need you or you might need them is so important.
That it is hugely important, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I just with my recent burnout again, I have to say that the most important lesson that I learned was that I can rely on other people. And I think that so I've been saying to my friends and family that, like, okay, we had this really bad week, but it needed to happen for a lot of reasons, and also for a lot of people. It was very interesting because my friends who sort of converged around this, they were getting things out of it as well, and it just became this crazy thing. And I realized like how little I rely on other people. I've been very, very independent. I've been very proud of that, and I think it is good. I think it's a really good thing to be independent, to be self-sufficient, to be, you know, happy doing things on your own, existing on your own. Those are all really good things. But at the same time, you do have to acknowledge that people in your life can support you. They can be there for you. And, you know, they probably feel good about doing that too. So like I've always been someone who doesn't want to put things on other people. Like, oh, I don't want you to feel responsible for me. I don't want you to feel like, you know, either of us owe each other something. And, you know, I try not to impede in any way. And during this period, I just sort of let it go. And it's the first time I've done that in my life. Like usually the only person I've relied on is my mom, who's like my best friend. I know, lame, but like my mom and I are super close. And so she's been the main person. And I've also thought more and more about how, you know, she's not going to be that person for me forever. And I need to build relationships with other people. And I need to like show weakness. And even in the midst of this, like, Jenna, at this point, you and I are fairly new friends, but I was like, I'm going to tell Jenna everything that's going on too. And I just like, I started reaching out to people who I thought, oh, they're going to be in my life. I'm going to trust these people. And it was, you know, kind of scary at first, but it all just went so well. And like the way, if you're scared of doing that sort of thing, it is really helpful and healthy. And especially when you find out that there are going to be people who are there to support you and catch you when you fall, like that's so important to realize that you have that.
Definitely. And I think too, like, it's really important to weed out the other people who aren't going to be there, you know?
Yeah. And that is why it took me so long. Like I'm 34 years old. It took me so long because I've had like quite a few toxic friendships. So I didn't have a very good foundation when I was younger, and that's just the headspace I got in, right? So I think a lot of us have that experience.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely, you know, copy paste of that scenario. I had a lot of people who just wanted to kind of use me for what I could do for them for a really long time, and I had a lot of toxic friendships, and on top of that, you know, my upbringing wasn't very stable, so I always just felt like a burden. So I didn't want to open up or share or rely on anyone. I was really proud of being super duper independent because I didn't want to rely on anyone and feel like a burden or have anyone pity me. Like, oh my God, having anyone pity me was like horrible. But yeah, but you know, I came to a point in, what was it, 2020, 2021, when we had to do our GoFundMe to move, where I was like, I'm at my wit's end. I'm going to off myself if I have to keep living in this situation. I was incredibly depressed. I was incredibly suicidal, and I was like, I have to rely on other people, and I have to rely on my community that I've built. And that was like the first moment that I'd relied on anybody other than my fiance for a very, very long time. And I feel like it kind of opened up my eyes to a world of, realizing like tons of people actually gave a shit about me, which I was like shocked about. But, seeing the people who donated, who I didn't realize I existed for the most part. And it kind of like shook me awake to be like, I'm not a burden. Sure, some people might pity me or whatever, but like, more so I felt just like sympathy and understanding from people. And while I still am uncomfortable opening too much up to too many people, I found myself opening up too much to people, and that backfired too.
I've done that.
Yeah, but it definitely made me, I feel like, trust in people more and believe in the good in people more versus focusing so much on me. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be this, and this. But in doing that, all I did was end up shutting out people who actually did care and actually wanted to show up for me, and they didn't know that they should show up. They didn't know that they could. And that's why, like, I honestly really, really respected, when you were telling me, everything that was going on with you a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things I think you said was, like, I can see us being really good friends. And I honestly, like, I didn't pity you. I didn't feel, like, I was sad for you but with what was going on. But I more so felt, like, honored that you would entrust me with, like, that kind of information, and you would tell me what's going on, and that you saw us being such close friends in the near future. I was like, oh, I feel so honored to know this and to show up for you, because, like, I see us being really good friends too. So, like, it was like touching as being like, I'm sorry this happened to you, obviously, but, like, I'm here for you. And, like, I imagine, you open up to other people and they were there for you too. So, like, good things came out of it, as in you realizing that you could rely on others and being more open and vulnerable about those things. And so, seeing it from the opposite side, like, if I were in your shoes, I would have been like, oh my God, Jenna's going to pity me, and, what if it doesn't turn out okay, or, like, she doesn't want to talk to me anymore. But then from my perspective, being like, I'm honored you opened up to me, and I'm here for you if you need anything, I realized, like, oh, other people feel that same way when I do those things, most likely.
That's sort of how I was feeling too, because because I was like, okay, well, how would I react? Like, I wouldn't be a jerk about this, and like, I respect I just sit with it and go, well, okay, I respect the people in my life enough to know that they're not going to react in a bad way. And that's the thing, like, when you do hold back from that, you hold back from deepening those relationships and building better friendships with people who are going to be there to support you, and, being really real with people. So when you're holding off all the time for fear of being a burden, you're going to, just tie yourself up into even more of a knot. And sometimes you just have to be vulnerable and open, and opening up that emotional side of yourself, even though it can be scary, it helps you be stronger in the long run. And that's why that is such a pivotal thing, having community and having support, and knowing that you have some good people around you that is going to protect you against future stress and burnout and things like that.
Yeah, and I think too, like, so much of burnout comes from a feeling of inadequacy, of I have to do this, and this to feel valuable to myself. And, I have to be productive because that's how I feel good about myself. And then you don't want to rely on others because you realize, oh, they're going to think I'm weak. They're going to think I'm a burden. They're going to think that I can't handle this. And if I don't value myself because I'm not doing these things, they're not going to value me either. And in reality, it's like we are our own worst enemies. Like, I was very depressed for a long time from haters online and, from people who was telling me to kill myself. And I was like, I'm already trying to, shut up. But like, I was so in the dark for so long in those ways. And then I kind of just came to a realization one day where I was like, I am the meanest person to myself. No one is going to be meaner to me than I am. No one's going to say anything meaner to me than I've already thought in my own head. So what does it matter? They have no impact on my life. They have no bearing on my decisions, on my personality. They aren't here in my shoes. They don't know who I actually am. They only see me through a screen or have like a singular interaction with me or know me from 5 years ago. Like, why am I bothering to care about what they have to say and feeling so burnt out because I feel like I can't do anything right in their eyes? Why am I trying to prove anything to people who are determined to misunderstand me when all I have to do is prove me to myself. And I can't do that because I have such high expectations for myself. But if any of my friends told me even half of what I was doing with my life, I would be so proud of them and wonder how the hell they're doing it and how they're managing it. Like, anytime I tell even the smallest amount of what I'm doing, where I'm like, oh, I work full time and go to school to full time, and someone's really like, I couldn't do that. I'm like, you know what? I'm fucking doing great then. Like, yeah. I'm doing fucking great on just those 2 things, and I got way more than that up my sleeve, but I'm doing things that make me happy and living in my truth, and I feel like I'm healing from that versus, trying to force myself into a box, hoping other people would like me, and just wanting to say yes to everybody and caring about stupid people on the internet and on the street who say mean things. Like, we're going to be our own worst enemy. We're going to treat ourselves the worst out of basically everybody else. But I think that's another tip for burnout right there, is we can't let ourselves be so mean to ourselves. Like, one of my favorite sayings is, would you talk to your friend the way you're talking to yourself? And if you decide to have like a friendship with yourself and you're friends with yourself, like, you can change the whole game. And it's definitely something that I'm still working on. Like, I'm not going to act like, oh, all of a sudden I got on antidepressants and I'm the smartest person ever and I have no problems with these things. Like, I definitely still do. And sure, my antidepressants help, but like, I'm only on the beginning of this journey, and I'm more so speaking and wanting to talk about the subject because I want to talk to like people who were like me like 5-10 years ago, who were not in the position that I am now, where I'm now figuring all of this stuff out. And some people might say, oh, like, I know this, but you might know this, but are you living it? Because I'm talking to you about it, and I'm still struggling with it now.
And sometimes it helps just to have someone else say things that you already know. It helps hammer it home and helps you realize it more. And about just sort of like, first of all, we are both works in progress. I think honestly, I think that everyone should always be a work in progress. You shouldn't ever feel like you're done. Because what are you doing with your life then if you're not still trying to grow and better yourself in some way and do things in a healthy way? But that being said, I think it's really important to celebrate your wins, because another thing with burnout, it can come from just having that tunnel vision and going and going and going and going without stopping to reflect. And like you said, if someone else told you about what they were doing, you'd be like, whoa, celebrate, enjoy this, that sort of thing. And a lot of the time we just get caught up in the work. So I would say another really important thing to do is to take a moment and, breathe and celebrate what you're doing, and just, take stock, have gratitude, and just, even if it's just at random, it doesn't even have to be like a landmark, right? It doesn't have to be, oh, I just published this book, because usually we put it off for that, right? I think that it's really important to not put off celebration, and just like, even right now, let's just throw an exercise out there. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this, when we finish, take a minute and just be like, okay, what am I doing right now? And what have I accomplished? Because I can promise you that there's going to be, at least one thing that you can pat yourself on the back about. And you should just do that. Stop, drop, and gratitude. Don't wait for the big milestones, but, celebrate those too.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a big motivator. Like, when I write down in my journal, like, my to-do list, and I'm scratching those off, I'm like, yes, I woke up early today. Boom. I showered. Boom. Like, and then I'll have bigger projects on there too, like write a certain amount of words or whatever it may be. But adding those small little wins that I automatically know I'm going to get just because I exist and I, do these things out of habit, then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have a little win, celebrate it. And it keeps me from freaking out by looking at my Kanban board and seeing it, oh, it's not moving as much as I would want it to. But then I can look at my journal and know, okay, I'm making small steps every single day towards those goals, the big ones that are on the wall. And I can see in my journal, okay, I'm making small little ones. So you can do things like journaling. You can do things like writing a little sticky note to yourself, like, you got this, and put it on your mirror. It can be like, oh, I'm going to treat myself to candy or something like this when I do this small thing, Whatever it is you need to do to be able to celebrate the small things that you're doing to move yourself closer and closer to a healthier life for you. Like, like Holly was saying, we're all works in progresses, and I think the whole point of life is to be a work in progress. You know, if you believe in reincarnation, if you believe in karma, then, you know, you believe that you've been here before, and in a past life there was something that you didn't do, something you didn't experience, something you didn't learn, and that's why you're here again. So it's like, you're going to keep doing that and being here for as long as you need to be. So make the progress that you know, need and want to make in this life, because you're only going to live between 50 and maybe 100 years on this planet. Like, you're going to spend a lot of those, you know, times when you're older being sure wiser, but not necessarily younger and more able-bodied. So, you know, celebrating what you do now, not being so stressed about it, because, you know, we're in our 20s and 30s and stuff, and it feels like we're already like halfway through our lives, but meanwhile we could easily live to 100 plus years old with the way technology is. Like, your life's not over just because you didn't make a milestone by a certain age. You shouldn't be stressing about it like it is going to be. Like, I know, at least when I was growing up, there was like a pressure to publish before you were 18. I don't know why.
I had a huge problem with that. Like, every artistic thing, I was like, oh great, I'm past 18 now, I'm done.
And I mean, too, publishing too, they prefer young new faces as well, especially if you're conventionally attractive. If you're white, able-bodied, straight, especially attractive straight white male, then it's very much so catered to you. But like, it's not all over by a certain age or time, and you set the boundaries for yourself. And I think that makes us feel so burnt out, because we're rushing and rushing and rushing to do this thing, and we're setting deadlines on ourselves that are unrealistic, and then burning ourselves out with those, you know, deadlines we're making, all because we're trying to fit into standards set by society that we don't necessarily even fit into. And like, you kind of just get to decide your own reality. Like, why make it fit into what other people decided? Exactly.
I think that those are all just perfect points. And to sort of summarize what we're saying, because I've been, you know, taking stock, taking account as we're saying this. I think that if someone is looking for like a little, you know, cheat sheet for things to keep in mind when you're avoiding burnout, is just, you know, maintain balance, appreciate yourself, be thankful, find a community, even if it's just one other person that you can rely on, and try to find those moments of peace, those moments where you can unplug and find focus away from the algorithms of the world, the social media of the world, the societal expectations, and really find those moments where you can discover who you are and what you want and what your creative goals are. And I think that all of those things will help you build a really strong foundation to go in a positive direction, even if you do get stressed sometimes.
Beautiful. Well said, Holly.
I was just going to say, I think we've covered this pretty extensively tonight.
Yeah, I think we can wrap that up.
Yeah, we got real. Hopefully some people out there identify with the things we've been talking about. I'm sure they do. It's
kind of a thing where, like, if you've experienced something, there's someone else out there who's experienced it too. Like, nothing in human nature is unique anymore at this rate.
Mm-hmm. You're not alone.
Yeah. Nicer way to say that same thing.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's always the dark and light side of things, right? Like, again, with balance, like, yeah, this is negative, but it's also positive at the same time. Maybe like everything's been done and everything's been felt, but that means that we can be more empathetic to one another. Definitely.
Well, I think that's it for this episode of Writing Craft. So if you like this video and the podcast itself, if you're listening on audio, do let us know. Feel free to follow us on Spotify and Apple, and on YouTube for the visual version of this podcast. We also have our own YouTube channels that will be linked in the description. And we love talking to you guys, so do continue the conversation with us down below.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening and watching once again. And I promise that hopefully by the time you hear this, I will have some more videos out on my channel.
We both will.
It's a promise. We're swearing right now.
We're in accountability buddies?
Totally.
I'll be looking for yours next week.
Hey, you too. Thanks so much again to everyone, and we can't wait to talk to you again next week.
Yep. See you guys next time.
Bye.